Did you enter your breastfeeding journey assuming that breastfeeding should be painful? Did you assume that your nipples needed to toughen up and that there would be some difficulty in the beginning and there was no way around it? Did you start out with painful breastfeeding, assume that your nipples would heal up, but then it would get better on its own eventually? Have you ever nursed a toddler in public or in private and worried that you might be judged by outsiders who don't really understand the biological terms of weaning? My guest today, Emily, shares her experiences of feeding her baby from newborn to toddlerhood and the difficulties that she faced. Now, these difficulties are ones that are common, and even though something is common, we talk about how it's not normal, meaning it doesn't. So even though something is common and can be normal in that way, we discuss in this episode how just because something occurs frequently doesn't mean that you have to experience it. I cannot wait for you to hear this story of somebody who is still nursing her 2-year-old. And bonus, she talks about how she gets her baby to sleep outside, which we know in many Scandinavian places is very common practice. Enjoy.
So my name's Emily Vallejo. We live here in Orange, Massachusetts. I have a husband and a daughter. We have a couple dogs. My husband's in the Army, so we move around a lot, but we've been here for about 1.5 years now, starting to put down roots, so to say, before we move again. But this summer I graduated from an Ayurvedic college. So I've been working on building a business geared towards postpartum health, specifically for women and their families in their homes in the first 42 days after giving birth. So that's kind of what I do, the gist of it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to dig more into that in our next episode because even as you just introduced that, I had so many questions pop into my brain. But I want to take you back to like long before you were married or had your own daughter into your childhood. And I want you to think back to any babies you knew or families with babies that you knew and tell me about what your exposure to feeding babies was as a child.
So my mom actually still runs a daycare, but she has since before I was born, since my older brother was a baby. So I was always around babies and small children growing up, and I knew that she breastfed all of us, but thinking back, I don't ever remember seeing someone breastfeeding their baby, which is kind of weird because I was always around babies. I did know the difference of like breast milk and formula because my mom would be watching kids who like we would warm up the breast milk in like hot water versus just making a bottle with formula.
Wow. That's interesting.
But yeah, I don't ever remember actually seeing someone breastfeed, but all my aunts breastfed their baby. So I don't know why I just don't remember seeing it happen. But
yeah,
it's like I knew that was like how to feed your baby, but I don't know. I don't ever remember seeing it.
Do you think that there were feelings of needing to be covered up and breastfeed in private?
Yeah.
And so that's why you never saw it?
I think that had a lot to do with it. I would talk to my mom about it after I had my daughter, and she was like, oh yeah, I always was either in a different room or it was really covered. And yeah, so it wasn't really out in the open, but it was everyone, like all her and all my aunts did it.
And when you started feeding your baby, did her feelings about being modest for her own life then impact you and your feeding relationship? Or did she no longer carry those feelings of needing to stay covered up and be separate?
I guess yes to both. I actually lived with her for a period of time when my husband was training for 6 weeks. My daughter was 2.5 months old, I think. Mm-hmm. So I was nursing all the time. And she would just say, just make sure you're covered. So I would cover myself in front of the daycare kids. But she never like made comments that made me feel like I shouldn't be doing it out in public.
Yeah, that's hard. You know, it's people who like run daycares and who are working with parents really closely. Like those are the people that can change the culture faster because if they set a tone of this is normal, this is how babies are fed. When young kids get exposed to that, then they know that we're mammals. And at the same time, she's getting paid by parents. And
Yeah.
so she has to kind of cater to how they might feel. But you never had, as you were growing up, you never saw parents like dropping off their kids and feeding really fast from the body before they ran off to work, or
Not that I remember.
okay, because I used to have to do that with my child when he
Yeah.
was in daycare, like one quick top off, you know, because it was so hard to produce milk when I was away from him with the pump, that I would always tell them, don't feed him towards the end of the day. I'll come and feed him, because I could produce enough from my body, but it was hard to produce enough with the pump.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised that there weren't parents that did that. Do you think if they had asked, that she would have like created space?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting. Okay. So you knew about body feeding, breastfeeding as the norm. You also saw a variety of ways that people fed their babies, and you even warmed up breast milk at daycares.
Yeah.
Did you help your mom like feed babies, or?
Yeah, we liked to.
Okay.
My sisters and I, mostly my younger sister, she was always really into babies.
Okay.
But her and I were really close growing up, so we like to help take care of the babies too.
And does your sister have babies now?
She does. She has 2 kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
and
good.
she wants a lot more.
Okay. I'm happy for her.
Yeah, she played with dolls until she was like 11.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so then once you were preparing to have your own baby, tell me about some of the prep you did as it related to baby feeding. Did you take a class? Did you read any books? Did you ask friends about their experiences? What was that like?
So, all my sisters breastfed. One had trouble with it, so she decided to formula feed, but I knew from the start that that's what I wanted to do. And I have 4 sisters, so
oh wow.
When I talk about sisters, it's probably different ones. But my sister, she's a year or so older than me. She's kind of my big idol, and as far as birth in this world, she had a home birth, and before she had her home birth, I was like, what? I didn't even know that was a thing. And so I dove into it after she did it and explained it all to me. So she's kind of like my mentor, I guess, in like mother world. And she had a really awesome experience breastfeeding, and I already knew I wanted to do it, so I always could ask her about advice and stuff like that. But I'm also a really big nerd, so I read lots of books when I was pregnant because I wanted to do everything right, everything perfect. But my favorite one was The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. I think reading it made me realize, yes, you feed your baby this way, but it can also be like this really cool way to bond, and just like a way you can comfort your baby that no one else can. So that to me was like, wow, I never thought about it that way. And I want to do that. I want to get into that. I did take a class. We were living on an army base at the time, so they had all these free. There was like a support group class run by an IBCLC. So my friend and I were both pregnant at the same time. We used to go together.
And was it for people who were both pregnant and already had babies?
Yeah.
Okay,
so there was other babies
so you got
there.
to like see people feeding their babies.
Yeah, it was really cool.
That's really cool.
And then she did do like a breastfeeding class where it was more thorough, like how much babies actually need in the first 7 days, how many poops or pees they should be getting, so you know if they're getting enough, and more like that, informational, I guess. Different positions you can try. So I did take that class.
And looking back, having had a baby and fed a baby, do you feel like the class was helpful?
I do, because a part of me when I was pregnant, I was like, oh, I'm just going to breastfeed and it's going to be easy. And that's just what's going to happen. My body's going to do it. But after I had her, there was a couple of things that were difficult. Looking back on what I had been told, like it shouldn't hurt. There's other positions you can try. Knowing that information really did help, because I was like, okay, it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. So let's do something about it. That really was helpful in my opinion.
Yeah. And was that a one-time class, or was it multiple days?
It was a one-time class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there was also like a specific breastfeeding support group that I went to after I had her.
That's great. The thing that I'm hearing about what you learned in the class, and then as I think about the problems that many people encounter in the early postpartum days, like the first few days, knowing the biologically normal volumes of milk intake is so important, because I can't tell you how many times when I work hospital shifts, people tell me I have no milk.
Yeah.
And they see the amount, the formula bottles that are given in the hospital are probably, I think they're like 2 ounces or
The
so.
pre-made ones,
It's
yeah, I
like
think so.
big. So when they're seeing that that's how much formula is in a container, and then they know that they're not able to produce that much in a
Yeah.
sitting, they start to worry that what they have is insufficient. And so I always, when I do prenatal education, I'm always reminding people, like, it's 5 ml, in one sitting, and 24 ml in an entire day. So that's very different than that huge bottle, which
Yeah.
is like basically what an infant might take in an entire day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I remember what stuck out to me most was like she showed us like a ping pong ball. There was like something like the size of the baby's stomach.
Yeah,
and
it's
I was
usually like a cherry or a
and they
marble.
they showed
Yeah.
it like as it was growing. And I was like, wow,
Right.
that's so small.
It's
and then
so tiny. Yeah.
actually, not that long ago, a couple weeks ago, I listened to your episode about the exact mLs, and I was like, wow, that really is so crazy. Hearing it again, I was just like, I gotta write that down somewhere because it's such good information to know.
It's such a good reminder that the drops that your baby gets in the beginning, that's enough. And those drops of colostrum are also sealing the gut. So it's playing a role beyond just nutrition.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And like, I've had friends recently who have given birth that like, they're already pumping at the hospital because the doctor's telling them, you're not making enough, your baby, your baby's too big, you're not making enough. And
I know.
I wish I was there to help.
I know. It's such a balancing act. And sometimes there is a reason to pump right away, but I would always want to work with an IBCLC to help figure out like how much should I be expecting. And when people pump at the hospital, they never have the right flange sizes. So then they're not getting anything when they pump, and then they feel discouraged. And then that idea of I don't have milk gets stuck because they're not getting it out with the pump.
Yeah. And then it creates a cycle
of
constant worry and stress over
exactly.
it, when it should be like a calming experience.
Yeah, for sure. So knowing that information, did you run into needing to remind yourself what small volumes newborns take, or was that not one of your difficulties in the beginning?
I don't think I was worried about that. The difficulty I had was, I'm trying to remember when it was. Because she was born really early in the morning, and I want to say it was that night. So it was almost like it had been 24 hours. It was like really painful when she would latch, and I would cringe at the initial like latch, and then I'm like, oh, God. But then it would get better. And I actually ended up using a nipple shield that like the next day during the day a couple times, just because my nipples were so sore. And I'm like, I gotta figure this out. She's not latching good, and I know there's a problem here. And then randomly, I feel like it was one of my friends just said to me to like try to squish my boob before it goes into her mouth. And that made the latch deeper. And then after that I was like, oh, okay. So then I just always like did a C shape on my boob and put it in, and then we were okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Just that one little tip. It can be hard. I don't know how you felt, but when breastfeeding should not hurt, and it hurts, and you don't know why it's hurting. Like from your view, it looks like baby's opening as wide as they can.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about how you felt in that short amount of time when you were having all of that pain, knowing that breastfeeding should not hurt.
I honestly was really, I don't think stress is the word. I was really sad about it, because I was like, why is this happening? I thought breastfeeding was going to be so easy. Like, I do all the natural things. Like, my body should just know what to do. I kind of got down on myself. And then one of my sisters, I was living in an apartment. It was like an old house that was like turned into apartments. And our downstairs neighbor was this really amazing older lady. She was like my mom's age. So she was like my mom kind of. And she had gotten me a box of breastfeeding goodies. And there was the nipple shield was in there, and like nipple cream. And so my sister was like, maybe you should just try a nipple shield for a little bit and see what happens. And I was like, oh, well, I actually have one of those, so I guess I could. And it was like the middle of the night, so I didn't want to. So the next day I tried it and I was like, okay, it doesn't hurt, but I know I don't want to use this long term because I like want to be able to feed my baby from my own boobs without anything in between. So yeah, it was really, I guess it just made me really sad because I felt like I'm not doing something right. You know, it just kind of spiraled. And I think it was also because it was in the middle of the night and I didn't want to wake up my husband and be up all night, both of us like stressing about it. So I kind of just stuck it out. And then I used the nipple shield the next day and then started doing the hamburger squish thing. And then by the next night it was fine. And the midwife came the third day, and it was like, it was fine. So it was like a really stressful night/day. And then I was like, okay, I'm just going to try again without the nipple shield and squish it in there. And then it seemed to click and we finally got a rhythm. So
yeah. And so you ended up having a home birth.
Yep, I did have a home birth.
I always tell people that birth setting really matters, and home birth is not for everyone, but choosing a place that recognizes the biological norms of infant feeding is so important, and a place that is able to recognize the various birth interventions and how they could impact baby feeding, so that if baby is super sleepy in the first 24 hours because you were just on pain meds for 24 hours, that can be factored into the equation, knowing that baby's going to wake up, they're not going to be so sleepy in another 24 hours, they're going to be able to feed. There are various considerations. And if you cannot find a place that you feel comfortable giving birth in that recognizes these things, being prepared to advocate for yourself or hiring a private practice, IBCLC, to help you work through it is so important. Do you think that having the time and space to kind of work it out for those few days contributed to your success, even though you were at home and you didn't have people to check with or ask?
I definitely do, because looking back, I would have still been at the hospital at that point, right? Because it was like in the 24-hour mark. And also I think it's noteworthy to say that my birth was like super fast and furious. It like knocked me into a different world. I was so like, I don't even know the word, overwhelmed, I guess. I was in shock when she was born. So it took a really long time for me to come back to this planet. So they did have her latch. I had a midwife and she had an assistant, and two of my sisters were there. And she was latching and it didn't hurt, but I didn't nurse her that often because we were both so tired. I had not been sleeping well for 3 days, even though it was like a 3-hour labor. I was so in shock and just like out of it, I guess. And also running on adrenaline. Like it was really hard for me to sleep after. So I think being in my own home and not having other people hovering over me and critiquing everything and making comments was like super helpful, because then I think I would have got more in my head about it and not, because I'm the type of person, I want to figure it out myself. I'll take your advice, but let me try to figure it out myself first.
Yeah.
So I think it was probably for the best. I know it was for the best that I was at home, because I didn't have all that external stress.
Yeah.
To go
feedback
with it.
coming in.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for.
It's funny because when I'm at the hospital, you know that as IBCLCs, you're contributing to this, but I don't know a way within that system to make it better. Like every practitioner is popping in on their own time. So sometimes it's 3 people all come to the room at the same time. And then other times it's like I come in as somebody else is leaving, and then somebody else comes in as I'm leaving. And we all think that the thing that we have to do is like the most important thing. And I would argue baby feeding is like the most important thing, but nobody else in the hospital thinks that. So, you get interrupted constantly. And being in the hospital is exhausting. Now, I will say the exception that I see to this is somebody who has multiple children at home.
Yeah.
And then they like to stay in the hospital for a while. Like they stay as long as they can because it's like almost a vacation.
Right. Yeah, I could totally get that.
And with the nipple shield, did you ever, like after that one day, you didn't need to use it again? Or
no?
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. It felt like it just clicked. Like I had used it long enough that she was getting a deeper latch, and I was understanding more like what it should feel like when she's latched, like I shouldn't have that like that pain because that means something's wrong. I think we both, and I think at that time, like I was coming back into myself more and okay, this is reality. I'm not in a different planet now, which sounds so weird, but I don't know how else to describe it.
No, yeah, I think anyone who's given birth, especially those fast and furious births, everyone says that even though you don't have to go through a long labor, it's so intense that it takes a while to recover from those super fast births.
It's like how I've described it before is my body just went on a bullet train away from me and I don't know, it just
you
like
just couldn't like jump on the train.
I like preparing for birth. I was like, oh, it's gonna last 24 hours. It'll start out slow and we'll just kind of ease into it. I'll light some candles and that happened. I woke up and it was like, boom, game time.
You'd probably been laboring through the night.
Yeah.
It's interesting, this idea of breastfeeding not hurting, because so many people hear from peers, oh yeah, it hurts in the beginning, but if you're experiencing pain, you need to get help. And a nipple shield is a great way to be able to continue to feed your baby and protect your nipples. And, you know, there are some places that just hand them out to solve every problem, which is not ideal. But if it's between not feeding your baby at all and feeding with a nipple shield, then feeding with a nipple shield is a great option.
Yeah. I thought it was a really great tool to like help me fix what was going on. So what you were saying about pain, how like it's normal just because a lot of people experience it. I don't think I really understood that until it happened to me. And because even after like our latch was good and whatever, I would get people asking like, are your nipples chafing yet? Have your nipples bled yet? And I'm like, no.
Right.
I hope that never happens to me.
I know.
But yeah. And even when I was pregnant, my older lady neighbor would make comments like that. And in my head, I was like, that's not going to happen to me.
Right.
But I'm glad it didn't. But it is crazy that that's kind of like the norm.
Yeah.
So to say.
I had somebody post on a TikTok video I did recently. It was actually really interesting. I don't think she knew she was talking to a lactation professional. I can't remember what exactly my post was about, but the person commented, I had to lanolin up my nips to use the pump. The pumping is what hurt until they toughened up. And then I basically responded, hey, this idea that nipples need to toughen up is inaccurate. And actually what needs to happen is we either need to get the latch correct or correct phalange sizing. And that's how you prevent your nipples from needing to toughen up.
Yeah.
And then she responded again and said, yes, that did. And I don't know about you, but after a couple of weeks of breastfeeding, my nips literally did toughen up, like rhino skin nips.
Ooh.
And I was like, I didn't ever respond, but if your nips look like rhino skin, something is going on.
Yeah, ouch.
And for some people, like, you know, like you'll see some people, I'll meet with some people and they are breastfeeding and their baby has a really shallow latch and you know their nipple is like rubbing on the top, on the hard palate, and their nipples look red, but they'll say, oh, it doesn't hurt at all. And maybe some people are more sensitive in their nipples than others, but like getting this idea that we should toughen up our nipples is incorrect.
Yeah.
If you are breastfeeding properly, there's enough breast tissue that goes into the mouth that the nipple goes all the way back to the soft palate. So there's no rubbing. Or if it is rubbing, it's rubbing on a soft surface, not on the hard palate. So what all that cracking and bleeding comes from is the nipple not going far enough back into the mouth.
Which makes so much sense. I think even more so after breastfeeding myself and experiencing, because it's one thing to hear it when you're pregnant and you're like, okay.
Right.
And then doing it, you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
I get it now.
Yeah. And I love that your friend gave you that tip of squishing the breast, because it just makes it to where they don't have to open up quite as wide to get a deep latch. But then once you let go, it helps them to kind of open up around the breast tissue.
She had her sister had breastfed 2 babies, and she was like so excited to breastfeed, kind of like me, like wanted to do it more for like comfort and everything. And she was like, I've seen my sister before squeeze it before she puts it in. She's like, maybe you should try that.
Oh my gosh, she hadn't even had a baby herself?
No, she was pregnant.
Oh,
she had her baby 2 months after me. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So
yeah,
it was very helpful.
So we've gotten you through the first like few days postpartum, and then anything else of note that happened?
I feel like it was easy, so to say. After that, one thing that looking back now that I did or thought, I guess, my daughter started sucking her fingers when she was maybe 2 months old. And in my head, I had remembered like this little piece of paper that I was given when I was pregnant. These are the signs that your baby's hungry. Like the early signs, because I wanted to be like, I'm not going to wait till she's crying to feed her. I want to feed her when she's giving me those first signs. So if anything, I got a little paranoid. Like every time she would suck her fingers, I'm like, oh, she's hungry. I got to feed her. So it seemed like I nursed her all the time, which looking back, I probably could have gone longer between nursing sessions, but she was a snacker about it. So like she would nurse for 5 minutes and then she'd be okay. And then she'd come back like half an hour later, which was okay with me. I didn't care because I didn't have anything else to do. I wasn't working at the time. And I was like, okay, whatever. I'll just feed you all the time.
Right.
But I think looking back now, I don't know if I would have changed it, I guess, because that was kind of like our rhythm. But then some people would make comments like, oh, you don't feed her on both sides. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I just always do the one and she seems full, and then I do the other one the next time. And it seemed like she only nursed off one side for like, I don't know, for a long time, like one side at a time until she was like close to a year old, and she would do both. But it just felt like normal to us. I don't know. I never felt like we were doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I love that. I'm always trying to encourage people like, hey, these are the like basic recommendations, but that's based on averages, and you are not an average and your baby is not an average. So you will do much better to just tune into your baby and follow your baby's cues. So whether your baby nurses for 5 minutes or for 20 minutes, whether they nurse from one side or both sides, as long as you are following your baby's cues and not looking at the clock and not obsessively tracking how much time on each side, you are probably going to have a robust milk supply and have enough for your baby.
Yeah. And that's what I really liked, because it helped me communicate with her better. I learned how to know she was hungry before it got to the point where she's screaming and super upset, and then it's so hard to feed her. But yeah, we just did our own little rhythm, and she was one of those babies that really can suck it down so fast. I remember being in a group one time, and she had like kind of a little bit of a stuffy nose, but you could hear like really going at it. And one of the moms was like, wow, she's really sucking that down. And I was like, that's what she does. That's why I think she didn't nurse for very long at a time, because she and I had a really strong letdown too, which took her a while to get used to. But once she did, it was like, okay.
And did you ever try offering the second side and she would be like, no, or you just never did because she would pull off and be disinterested?
I did a couple times, but it felt like I was almost forcing her to want it. And I was like, I don't want to do that. That feels weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of the time she would either fall asleep or she would just, pull off and just be like really relaxed looking.
And what did that mean for nighttime? Did she have really short windows between feeds, or was she able to go longer stretches at night?
In the beginning, it was short. It was like 2 hours, sometimes less. It's all such a blur now, but in the beginning, she ate pretty frequently, but it was really kind of weird because when we went to stay with my mom for those 6 weeks, she was like 2.5 months old. She was sleeping like 10 to 12 hours at night.
Whoa.
It was so weird. It didn't last. It was really nice when it did last, but
she's probably so exhausted from playing.
It was so weird, but
so much.
And she would still nap often throughout the day, but we were nursing very often throughout the day, and there was stimulation from like the daycare kids, and we were outside a lot, and it was weird. She would go like 10 to 12 hours, and then I'd nurse her. Well, actually at that point I was like waking up before she woke up and pumping because I was so full. That was like the only time I pumped But then she would wake up and nurse Munch, and sometimes we'd fall back to sleep together in bed for 2 hours, and it would be like 11 o'clock, and I'm like, oh,
gosh.
okay.
That's amazing.
Guess I need to get my act together.
And then how long did you end up feeding her?
So we're still breastfeeding.
Okay.
She turned 2 on January 5th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
happy birthday.
that was my goal, was to make it to 2 years old, my tentative goal that I set forever ago. But now that we've met it, I'm like, I don't know. We'll just see what happens, I guess. She doesn't seem ready to be done with it, and it doesn't bother me to still be breastfeeding, so we're just rolling with it,
That's
I guess.
great. And have you gotten any negative comments about feeding a toddler?
No, but I think in my own subconscious, I'm like worried about getting those comments. Actually, last week we were at the library in Amherst for story time, and she doesn't say boobies, she says D. She will say boobies if I sound it out with her, but when she wants it, she just goes D and points to my boobs, and I'm like, not right now. But then if she's really persistent about it, I'm like, okay, I'll just make sure I'm not flapping. And I was talking to another girl who had a 6 or 7 month old, I think he was. And she was like, oh, I don't care. And I just feel like maybe people think it's weird because she's so old. She was like, who cares? And I was like, you're right. Who cares?
I know. When I weaned my daughter, she was 4.5. I was just tired. I was just tired of breastfeeding. By the time I fed my daughter, I was a lactation professional then. And I knew that it was within the biological norm. I felt very strongly that people should be able to feed their babies and toddlers anywhere and everywhere. Yet I still would limit her a little more in public because I just didn't want to deal. And she's big. She's like big for her age. So tall, it looked like I was feeding like a 6.5-year-old. But I do understand feeling just a little more self-conscious the older they get.
And I think it's because you don't, at least from my perspective, I don't see many people feeding their toddlers.
I know.
Out and about. There actually was another mom at the library who, I think her daughter might have been 2 at the time. I saw her nursing a couple times. I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can do that too.
Yeah. And you're right that we don't see very many people breastfeeding toddlers in public. But if you ask, many people continue to in private.
I totally get that.
Which is kind of sad.
The American Academy of Pediatrics, that's what it's called, right? AP. They recommend now 2 years.
Right. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, has recommended that for years and years, 2 or until both mom and baby or one or the other want to stop.
And I feel like most people, it's okay, they're 1 now, like time to not be a baby anymore. But
now, how does she do with solid foods?
She's not a really good eater. She's a good eater. We were all sick over the holidays, so like she wasn't eating a lot. And then I was actually super grateful that we were still breastfeeding because in those times where like she has a fever randomly or she is sick, that's all she does. And I'm totally okay with that. But yeah, ever since we got over the sickness, she's been eating really well. And we don't really nurse that often during the day if she's busy playing or like distracted. Like sometimes she won't even want to nurse first thing in the morning now, which is new, especially if I don't get her up out of bed. If my husband goes and gets her, then she'll forget about it and we'll be eating food. But she always kind of makes up for it later in the day. Yeah. She'll be sitting in my lap and want it. We always kind of have those moments throughout the day still, so.
And your husband is in the military. So have you spent any time as a family on military bases, or have you always lived off base?
We got married when he was at Fort Drum, which was where we were before we moved here. And we did live off base. So we have never lived on a base together.
Okay. And have you spent any time around other military families, like breastfeeding?
Yeah. And that's where like all... like the classes and everything I went to, everything was on base.
But I mean, since you've had your baby?
Oh, well, my best friend where we were living, the one that had the baby 2 months after me, she is also a military spouse. So yeah, she was like my only close friend there. So although when we hung out with my husband's friends, I'm thinking of one in particular, his wife did breastfeed, but she always did it in private. And when we went to their house, my daughter was young. She was like, you can go upstairs. There's a rocking chair and it's quiet.
So is that what you did? Or were you like, I'm fine?
But I kind of almost wanted to be, because it was like all these dudes, like guys. I was like, I don't really want to.
Yeah. I was just wondering what the culture was in your experience within the military around breastfeeding. And
I feel like it was pretty normalized. Yeah, I guess I didn't really have that big of an exposure, because after she was born, we moved when she was 5 months old. So I was going to support groups and stuff, but I was more just hanging out with my friend and we would go shopping sometimes, but I wasn't really out and about. But I don't ever remember feeling judged or anything when I was doing it out in public or at military functions or anything.
That's good. And then I know that you have also cared for another family with young children. Has breastfeeding been an issue in those situations as you breastfeed your toddler, or the family's totally open?
No, they're totally open. That mom breastfed her baby too. They aren't now, but they don't ever make comments or anything. I'm kind of weird. My daughter naps outside.
Oh, really? That's great.
So one day the mom was like, "Oh, that's so awesome. How do you get her to sleep out there?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just nurse her for a little bit, and then she waves goodbye to me and she falls asleep."
Oh my gosh.
So like I'll just like make comments.
What do you
about
put her
that.
in to sleep outside?
So it sounds so weird.
Well, I know that this is common in Scandinavia, so
yeah. Well, I read that book, There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather, and I was like, oh, I want to do that. And she was born in January, but where we were living, I couldn't really have her sleep outside unless I was there, because I didn't want to leave her outside. But she would just fall asleep on me when we were walking outside, because we walk the dogs every day. But now, so it's kind of a coincidence how it happened. I bought dog beds. I don't know if you're familiar with the ones. I don't even know what material. It's like nylon, but
and it's elevated. Yes.
Yeah. So I was vacuuming our other ones one day, and I was like, these are so gross. I'm going to put them on the side of the street. If someone wants them, they can have them. If not, we'll throw them away. I mean, I bought those ones. And one of our dogs, he's kind of weird with like new things. And he didn't like it. So I was like, well, I'm not going to return it to Amazon. I already put it together. And I was like, I think I could think of a different way to use this. So I used that just to elevate her. Yeah. And then I bought a bunting bag, like to go in the stroller, because she used to sleep in the stroller, but now that she's bigger, she's not as comfortable. So I have that little sleeping bag thing, and then a sheepskin rug, just like a sheepskin that's kind of the same size as the bunting bag, but I just put that in there for a little extra layer, and I bundle her up. And
wow. So does she feed all bundled up and then you put her down, or she feeds and then you take her over to her space and she lays down?
So we get dressed inside. I lay her up too, because usually I'll go out and read my book while she's sleeping, and then I can lay down on that with her. So it hasn't broken yet.
Wow.
We have big dogs, so I got like the biggest one. But yeah, I'll just lay down next to her and she'll feed bundled up. And then usually she's either falling asleep or she's twirling her or my hair and getting really those tired eyes. And I'm like, okay, it's time to take a nap. And then she'll just nod her head. And
oh my gosh, I love this. You were the first person I've interviewed who has their child sleep outside. And this is something I've always wanted to do. My kids, not that they're older, we have a couch on our back screened-in porch. And now and then one of them will sleep out there like at night. But they've both gotten a little more fearful recently, so they don't want to be out there alone. And a couple of years ago, we always do the 1,000 hours outside challenge.
It's kind of what like got me more started on it too.
Exactly. And so a couple of years ago, we were so close to getting 1,000 hours, but we didn't have it yet. And so we slept in a tent in our yard in December.
That's awesome.
For a few nights. Because if we camp, I count every minute.
Yeah, I would too. That's like kind of how it started, because I already knew after I had her, I want us to be a really outdoorsy family. I want her to really love being out in nature. When I was staying at my mom's at that one point, because she had a more safer outdoor space that I could leave her for a little bit, she would fall asleep on me walking, and then she was all bundled up. I'd lay her on my mom's deck, has like benches around it. So I'd lay her on the bench and I could go inside and pee or do something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. And then when I started caring for this other family, we do a floor bed at our house. So it was hard to get her to go down for a nap. She wasn't in a pack and play. It was kind of hard. So she would just fall asleep on our stroller walk, and then I just leave her in the stroller and she would stay sleeping. It just evolved from that. And then as she got older, I introduced her to like not in the stroller, just laying down.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that. So I know you will be working away from your daughter soon. Have you already started that?
The 29th.
Okay.
So 2 weeks.
And are you planning on pumping when you're away from her, or you're hoping that your supply is regulated enough that you won't have to?
I have been toying with that idea. When I'm training day shift, I'm going to be working 11 to 11. I will still nurse her in the morning, but then that's going to be it unless she happens to wake up in the night, which she does sometimes, and she might if I'm not nursing her to sleep. I don't know. But yeah, I do actually still have some frozen breast milk, but we usually just use it for baths because she never took a bottle for me.
So do you think that you'll feel any pressure or engorgement when you're gone, or you think it'll be fine?
I think it'll be fine because there's some days where like she only nurses once or twice and I don't feel anything. When she was nursing more over the holidays, when she wasn't feeling good, I was actually feeling letdowns again, and I hadn't for a long time. I don't ever get that full feeling anymore, even if it's been like 8+ hours. So I think it'll be okay, but I also do have a hands-free pump I might bring just in case, like if I take a lunch break and feel like I need to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your baby feeding experience. And I can't wait to have you back to talk about what you do as an Ayurvedic practitioner.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Awesome. Thanks.
I would love to hear what your favorite part of my interview with my friend Emily was. It's so awesome to have friends and colleagues who care as much about the health of families as I do, and ensuring that both mom and baby feel really good in the world. Emily, my favorite part of this interview is when I discovered that her toddler naps outside. So cool. Now, Emily is going to be coming back onto the podcast to share how you can incorporate Ayurvedic practices into your postpartum experience. So this is going to be a great show, whether you yourself are in the postpartum experience, whether you're planning for it, or whether you are another practitioner who would like to learn more about how Ayurvedic medicine can help the families that we serve. If you are local to my area, Emily is offering an infant Abhyanga class. And this is a class that uses Ayurvedic massage techniques for babies and children. This class will be taking place in Orange, Massachusetts on February 24th. That's a Saturday at 10 a.m. So if this is something you are interested in, I will link the event in the show notes. And come back in just a couple of days to hear about how Ayurvedic practice can help you and your infant feel better in the postpartum period.